Hi, my name's Marijana, and in today's video we are going to be making this trick-or-treat countdown. In order to complete today's project, you're going to need two different colors of 3mm acrylic paint and paintbrushes, 3M 467 MP double-sided adhesive, an X-Acto knife or scissors, a measuring tool like a digital caliper or a measuring tape, a pen, and a ruler. When starting with the design that's going to be on the front of the sign, the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to measure out how much 3M tape we are going to need for our design. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at the width and height of the design in xTool Creative Space. And I can see that the width is about 120 millimeters wide and approximately 110 millimeters tall. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure out that height and width on this acrylic sheet. If you go a bit bigger than the width, that's okay. It's better to have it wider than too thin. I'm going to go ahead and mark a line on my masked acrylic sheet. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing for the height. Now that we have this square marked off, we are going to remove the masking from this corner and we are going to replace it with the 3M adhesive, keeping the paper side facing upwards. To make it a bit easier to remove the masking on exactly where I need to remove it, I'm going to very lightly score the line that I have made with the pen with my X-Acto knife. Now we can go ahead and peel off the masking from this corner. With the acrylic now exposed, we're going to recover it with our 3M adhesive. Once it's smoothly on there, you can cut off the excess with your X-Acto knife. Now that this is masked, we're ready to put it into the machine. When you put this acrylic in the machine, you're going to want to make sure that this 3M double-side adhesive is facing downwards instead of upwards. If you want to keep it upwards, you need to mirror the image before you cut it, because you want the sticky part to be on the back. So when we remove this adhesive cover, this part will be sticky, and we want to make sure that the sticky part is on the back of the lettering and the design. So I am just going to flip this over. P2 actually comes with these little clips, and you can use this to mark the edge of where the 3M adhesive is. So I can see here that the adhesive ends right here, so I can mark it off here. Now that we have these two little clamps secured, we can use these other two to secure the acrylic to the slats. This is just to make sure it doesn't move while it's cutting or engraving. All right, and now we're ready to cut this acrylic. When starting with cutting the design, you want to make sure that all of the other elements except for the design are not in the middle of your workspace. So I'm just going into XCS and I'm going to make sure that all of the elements that we're not currently cutting are set to ignore right now so that we can just focus on the front of this design. I'm just double checking here that the design is set to cut, and I'm setting it as user defined. Depending on the color of acrylic you're using, you want to make sure that you select the correct color from the reference list that's provided in XCS, and using the correct power and speed for your material. As always, make sure that you set the focus. Here I'm just using the autofocus feature, and I am placing the design where I want it on the acrylic sheet. You can see here that the clamps are a good guide for me to understand if I'm out of bounds or not, and I'm also just switching the layer color because it was a bit difficult to see the orange with the bright light. Using the close-up view, I am just adjusting how the design is sitting on the acrylic and just making sure that everything is good to go to be cut. Now that we're done with the front of the design, we can go ahead and set that to ignore, and we will work on the rest of the counter. Here I'm going through the usual steps where I am measuring the focus and I am placing the rest of the elements of the counter onto my acrylic sheet. Again, I'm making use of the close-up view to make sure that I'm maximizing all of the area that I have available on my acrylic sheet and puzzling all of the pieces together. The front piece and the back piece of this counter both have score marks that I have marked in purple. These are just guides so that when we are putting all of the pieces together, it's a bit easier to see how the pieces will fit and they will come together as close as possible to the digital design that we have in XCS. The middle portion, which is the counter itself, has pieces of candy and numbers on it. These will be engraved, which is why they are in a light blue. Again, please make sure that you are using the correct settings for speed and power for the material that you are using. Different colors of acrylic require different levels of speed and power to cut, engrave, and score, and different brands may have different settings as well. So just double check that. The piece of acrylic that's going to be used for the counter in the middle has just finished cutting and engraving, and I thought this would be a good opportunity to point out something important for this project. So if we take a look at the engraving on the numbers and the candy, we can see that the engraving is not very deep, and if we touch it, it feels flush to the rest of the acrylic. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run another pass or two on this acrylic to ensure that the engraving is quite deep, because that is important for the assembly. So depending on the acrylic that you are using, you want to make sure that the engraving on the counter is actually deeper than the surface level. Before we start taking all of the masking off of the acrylic, the first thing that we're going to do is we are actually going to paint and fill in the engraving on the centerpiece. For this, I'm using a few different colors of acrylic. You can get very creative here. Now, while this starts drying, we can start taking the masking off of the other pieces. When you're unmasking the pieces of the design, you want to make sure that you're only removing the front masking that was originally on the acrylic sheet, and you want to leave the 3M on for now, and we will remove it later when we assemble all of the pieces together. Finally, at the end, once all of the other pieces have been unmasked, feel free to unmask the painted piece even if it's still wet. If you accidentally smudge a bit of the paint, that's no problem. You can just go in with a wet Q-tip and wipe off whatever is meant to be there. Now that all of the pieces have been cleaned up, the counter is ready to be assembled. Before you assemble, you want to make sure that all of your paint has been dried in your middle portion with the candies and the numbers. So I will be back once my paint dries. Alright, now that everything's dry, we can start to assemble this. So the first thing that we're going to start assembling is the front of the countdown. I have all my letters sorted out here, and what we're going to do is for each letter we are going to peel off the 3M backing, and we are going to stick it on the base of this acrylic. And we did score the front of this acrylic sheet with the design, so you can use the scoring as guidelines on how to exactly place your letters. Now we have the front and the design ready to go, and the last thing that we are going to do before we put everything together is we are going to take the middle piece that was in the inside of the counter wheel. We are going to put 3M tape on both sides of this, and we are going to use this as the base for the counter to spin around. So I'm going to put a little square on this side. Keep the paper on for now. and another square on this side. Now all of our pieces are ready to go and we can start assembling. What I like to do to make sure everything is lined up correctly is I like to put the front on top of the wheel and get the front of the project lined up. And you want to make sure that the number is visible in the little hole of the front of the design. Once you're happy with how the front looks, you can very carefully flip it over. Now what we're going to do is we are going to take the 3M adhesive off one of the sides of the circle that will go in the counter. And we are carefully going to place it right in the middle. Now we can go ahead and peel the 3M tape off the back as well. And we're going to take the back piece and stick it on top. And you're going to do your best to align everything. Now that our countdown is ready to go, we can put it onto the base. This just slides into the grooves. Now we have everything assembled and your counter is complete.